Time for another steaming hot helping of half-assed reporting. It's James Kalm, the guy on the bike, and we are coming back up onto the Bowery. I'd like to make a shout out to a couple of people, our viewers on the Olympic Peninsula, some of the viewers in Eastern Oregon, not that far away, and our friends in rural England. Thanks for watching. And we're gonna pop in here to Andrew Edlin. Okay. I'm gonna look at a show by Brent Green titled A Brief Spark, bookended by darkness. And okay, we've got to go behind the black curtain. Well, I'll pan around the installation. Now, Brent, got to be careful, these things turn on, and if you're standing too close you get shredded. Brent is probably better known as a independent filmmaker, animator. We'll watch a little bit of his videos here. I was in yesterday, I was talking with Andrew Edlin here, and he was saying that he actually became aware of Brent through the films and videos that he was making, and was saying that Brent has gotten a lot of support from Sundance and some of the other filmmaking institutes and some of their festivals. He's also saying that Brent is a high school graduate, but that he is not formally trained in art, and there is a strong folk art, outsider art theme to a lot of the work. I like the shadows. And I think there's a lot of musical concepts that he's playing with here as well. These sculptures are all basically pretty sophisticated musical instruments. I believe this is A Spark Bookended by Darkness, 2017. Animation, 4 minutes and 30 seconds. This piece is titled Bell and Hammer Piano, 2018, mixed media, 90 by 65 by 36. And they displayed this at the Outsider Art Fair, and they had to have someone standing by here constantly because this piece radiates an almost unrelenting desire to make people come up and touch it and play the keys and see the hammers hit the bells. We're going to resist. This piece is titled Bass Violin Dress. Oh, there it goes. Now, you can see that it's got these long strings, and it's got a bow on there that is theoretically playing the strings. I told Andrew that I wish that there was no no video playing in here because I'd love to hear what this sounds like without the interference of the video soundtrack. This piece is probably about 10 or 11 feet long, motorized. And gee, I don't know where Brent gets his wood, but this looks like something that was made out of old barnwood or some kind of scavenged refuge. We've got 3 other pieces here with this kind of spiraling string boxes. I was telling Andrew that I look at a lot of and pay attention to a lot of street musicians, and every now and then I see a guy in Williamsburg that has a hurdy-gurdy, and in a certain way I was thinking that some of these pieces look like giant hurdy-gurdies. Let's see if we can find the title for this. This is titled Medium Violin Dress. So I guess there is a, oh, that's it. So it's almost like we've got the shoulders and the straps. I guess you could wear this at some point and have a friend with you that would hold the bowstrings. So I will assume this is medium-sized violin dress. So I'd say this is about 48 inches wide by 60 inches tall. And yeah, Brent has painted this with kind of like toll house designs. I think this is a large violin dress, and well, this has an oval structure to it, so it doesn't rotate, but it's got this arm here that kind of drums on the strings. You know, I was also thinking about Pythagoras, the great mathematician that everybody, if there's one equation everybody knows, it's the square of the hypotenuse equals the sum of the square of the 2 adjacent sides. But some people don't know that Pythagoras was also one of the first people that started dealing with the idea of music and strings and the length of strings and octaves and the whole concept of the structure of sound. Okay, we'll look at some of the pictures. Okay. So there is a lady wearing one of the violin dresses. This is titled All the Memories and Imaginations You Are Constructed of, 2017. Oil paint on paper and shellac. Well, Brent is actually kind of an interesting painter. It's a very kind of surreal and funky. I'm going to look at actually a large painting. Not exactly the best environment to look at this in, but let's see if I can read the title. This is titled Fisherman's Wife, 2018, 96 by 48. oil on plywood. So this was a run-through of Brent Green, A Brief Spark Bookended by Darkness, here at Andrew Edlin Gallery on the Bowery. We're gonna keep moving, try to catch at least one more very interesting show. We're just gonna go a little bit down Rivington Street. Well, I hope these guys are open today. Oh yeah. Betty Cunningham, Tibor de Nagy. And we're going to look at a very special show. Jess. Secret Compartments. Well, I popped in yesterday on my day off. I didn't take my camera out of my pocket, but I just ran around and kind of made some preliminary visits and selections, and well, I saw this show and decided that I would definitely have to come back and take a longer look, a lingering look. Well, I think that I did a report on a Jess show probably about 8 or 9 years ago when Tibor de Nagy was still on 57th Street. And it has remained one of my favorite videos. I even go back occasionally and watch it myself, like every 6 months or so, because it's such a fantastic show. And this is also of that caliber. I'll read a little bit from the press release. Jess, 1923 to 2004, was born Burgess Collins in Long Beach, California. He initially studied chemistry at the California Institute of Technology. He spent 3 years in the Army at the Atomic Energy Laboratory and had a small part in the Manhattan Project, developing the first atomic bomb. While working on an atomic energy project, he became disillusioned with science after having a nightmare about the world destroying itself, and instead returned to art. His teachers included some of the most influential West Coast painters of the period, including David Park, Elmer Bischoff, and Clifford Still. During this time, Jess met poet Robert Duncan, who would become his lifelong partner and frequent collaborator. They were an influential force in the San Francisco artistic community who brought together painters, poets, and hipsters in general. We'll start out looking at some of these, which are collages, and I believe Jess called these paste-ups. This is untitled, with Wanda Lenkowska, 1952 to 53. Well, I think that, as I was just saying in reading the press release, that Jess was a very influential artist on the West Coast and in San Francisco. And I think it's interesting to kind of note the surrealism that he was dealing with, but he was also influenced by people like Clifford Still and David Park, who were very much known for their painterly approach. This is untitled Pooh figure. It's a Rufino Tamayo drawing. And I think if you were to look at it, you'd probably see that Jess was a harbinger of a lot of things in California culture and Bay Area culture. One of them was the whole beat thing. This is untitled Epic Ham. Okay, so I was looking at this. He likes to play with words. Epic ham, imp, I'm a peach, impeach, me chimp. So he's taking variations on the impeachment word. Jess and Robert kind of fit in a great period when the beats were coming out, and a lot of people think that most of the beats were here in New York, but actually Allen Ginsberg first read Howl out in San Francisco, and I wouldn't be surprised if Jess and Robert were right there the evening that he read that, sometime in 1956. This is titled Attention, which is the Eye of the Heart, Salvages 3. So it would be interesting to have a little timeline. We're talking about the Beats and the Poets, Robert Duncan's friends, and the whole on the road Kerouac, Ginsberg, and 1956 was a big year for them, but that's also the year that Jackson Pollock smashed into a tree out on Firehouse Road in the Springs. I actually like this piece. So this is 1963 to 72. So Jess is kind of going through a lot of developments with this, but you can see how he's transitioning between a very chunky abstract expressionism, and then he actually develops into his very precise, almost illustrative realism. And I like this little detail of it's like an underwater archaeologist. He's down there swimming and he's lugging up an amphora. This is from a private collection. It's titled Rock Salt Cleavage, 1955, paste up. This is titled On Corbett's Dismissal, 1951. So he might be commenting about his teacher there at the Art Institute. I think this is probably maybe the best example in the show of his abstract expressionism. This is Prison Isle, 1954, oil on board, 11 by 15. And Sea Cove, oil on canvas, 17 by 23 and 7/8. We'll just call it 24. But we can see his love of the pigment, And I think another interesting aspect is that, well, he was obviously very aware of the art object and particularly what a painting was. And I believe this is probably an artist frame, so he's got kind of a green velvet frame that he's made. Untitled Girl with Geese. This is titled Prelude, 1955, oil on canvas. Well, this is an interesting piece because he gets away from his thick, chunky color. He goes into figurative work, but it's got great kind of scumbled colors, thinly scumbled colors. And, well, these little figures and kind of the composition in general makes me think of Florian Stettheimer a little bit. And, well, Florian was another kind of outsider or a very unique painter. This is a drawing. Study for Narcissos 1, graphite on paper, undated. Well, Jess was a very accomplished draftsman. Okay, I like this piece. In Praise of Sir Edward, translation number 7, 1965. Oil on canvas, mounted on board. Well, this is the kind of work that I first saw of Jess's, and well, I've always been a fan of chunky paint, or maybe not always, but once I started painting and came to New York, seeing people like Vincent van Gogh and Jackson Pollock, I became a fan of paint. And, well, I love the way that Jess is able to get these very articulate lines in there, but it's kind of like cut into or scratched into this thick, chunky paint that he obviously worked on for a long time. This is 1965. This actually makes me think of an artist that's a Facebook friend of mine. He's a British artist named Simon Link. And, well, Simon does some work that kind of relates to that. We got some of the publications on Jess. Hylos Brilos made this, aka Boucher's Greek Vase Painting, 1975. I like these because, in a certain way, they kind of relate to pop art, but Jess had his own version of what was popular. A lot of it has kind of esoteric, mystical sense to it. Sultry Eucalyptus Bush, 1953. Well, I came in and was looking at this. I thought this was just a total abstraction, but now I'm looking at it, I realize it's a landscape, but you can definitely see the influence of people like David Park and Clifford Still with his chunky palette knife paintings, and looks like he's even added some grit in there. I'm going to try to get over to the Milton Resnick show later today, and you'll see the relationship between some of the paint surfaces that Resnick was achieving and some of the stuff that Jess was doing. We got 3 of the circular paste ups. Jeez, I think that's Ezra Pound in there. Okay, this has got to be his emblems for Robert Duncan, number 3. But they were there for they were here, 1989. Okay, maybe that's Robert Duncan in the middle. Walt Whitman, Ezra Pound, Shakespeare, James Joyce. Got the whole crew. Once more remembering you, build a shrine to America. Two Northern Ladies Set Out, 1955, oil wash on unsized canvas. I thought this made me think of Bonnard Vuillard. They were part of the Nabbies, or the Prophets movement. This is the title piece of the show. This is Secret Compartments. Oil on canvas, 44 by 36, 1952. Actually, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking of our little visit to a show by Stephen Benedetto, a couple of blocks away from here. And yeah, there are some parts to this and some of the quality of his handling and his paint surfaces that kind of makes me think of Stephen. Okay, let's go downstairs. This is a wonderful selection of some of the collaborations that Jess did with poets. And so here we've got a poem, Conversation. She went to the tree where the angels were talking. It's by Robert Duncan. A lot of these were designed as maybe posters or handouts to advertise poetry readings and maybe little small press run poetry books. Also, I think it's interesting that you can kind of see some of the influences that Jess was running through, not the least of which is, especially on something like this, is maybe Aubrey Beardsley. The song of the border guard, the man with his loin under the shed of wars. Now, I like this piece. Cover for Credence number 3, 1976. So I got a kind of a paste up note to photographer. Okay. I don't know how many of you have ever done paste ups, at least back before this was all taken over by the computer, but yeah, this is great. He's got his deck white, chalk lines, surrealist shells. Okay, this is the piece that really caught my eye. This is Untitled Handbill, 1951. Ink and collage, but I was looking at this and thinking, yeah, if this is 1951, this kind of has to be a harbinger or a forebear of the whole series of artists that were doing posters and things like that in the 60s, the kind of the Family Dog and the Fillmore West poster artists. But this is great, the way that he's got his kind of psychedelic lettering, brilliant colors, and I wonder if Jess was also indulging in some of the early psychedelics. Could have been. It's an interesting little triptych. I believe this is folding triptych. Lovers 3, erotic triptych. It's 1969. Mixed media. Now this is quite a bit different than a lot of his paintings at the time, because this is pretty flat. It actually looks like maybe it's colored pencil or crayon. Cakewalk Princess, 1954. Well, Jess was a very prolific worker. There was one piece that I didn't take a long time to look at upstairs, but it was a puzzle. And he did a whole series of puzzle works where he would go out and buy dozens of puzzles and then would actually put puzzles together from, pieces from other puzzles that would fit together into different configurations. And I don't know, that's the kind of work that takes a lot of time, but you can see that like a lot of outsider artists, he was very obsessive and very intent on doing a lot of tedious work. Okay, this is Lawrence Jordan. So I don't know if that's the filmmaker or the title of the piece. The 40 plus 1 Nights, 1962, 16 millimeter color film digitally transferred. This is titled Didactic Nickelodeon, and well, this is interesting. I've never seen any of the kind of more realized sculptural work by Jess. So I guess that you've got like a little album that you could flip through, and I assume that all fits into the suitcase. Like I said, Jess is one of these people that went through a lot of different approaches, surrealism, abstract expressionism, pop art, a certain kind of realism, but a lot of it has a kind of wonderful mythical fantasy world element. Zap, 1993. Wish Loving Reception. Eight, A Daydream of Fortune. Okay, here's another one of his wonderful paintings. This is X2, Credo Socrates, translation number 3, 1964, oil on canvas mounted on wood, 18 by 25 inches. And this is also from a private collection. And I think in a way that a painting like this is a great example of the kind of diverse elements, the kind of the contrasts that Jess was working with. He's got a very, very articulate, very sharp-edged kind of realism, but that's all rendered in this very material, very chunky, very unsharp medium of the real goobed on oil paint. I think they've got a beautiful one of his paintings down at the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. of a little boy in a pumpkin field that I always make it a point to drop in and visit like he's an old friend. It's titled A Wish in the Form of a Landscape, 1954, 40 by 52. Well, it's interesting if you were to compare various pieces from the different years, you would see that it's like Jess never really limited himself down to one direction, that he was pretty open when it was it's like here he's playing with the landscape, almost like a Andre Derain or a Soutine, but he's also at the same time doing his paste-ups and some of the other pieces that are more articulate. This is Apollon Hakintos, 1962, oil on canvas, 60 by 30. I think this also is an example of kind of his muted colors. I was talking about Vuillard and Bonnard, and they were known for using a lot of their grayed out earth tones and tertiary colors. So we've got a kind of an erotic theme here. Oh, okay, and we've got some Greek text. Yeah, I don't read Greek. I can barely read English. This is Almost Daybreak, another painting with a very muted palette. But he's got a great use of his brush strokes and the way that he kind of sculpts the paint. We'll wrap up looking at these groups. These are mystic writings, wax crayon on paper. Oh gosh, I can't read any of this stuff. So this is James Kalm reporting on Jess. Secret Compartments here at Tibor de Nagy on Rivington Street on the Lower East Side. You can leave your comments, critiques, reviews, suggestions, ideas, talking points. You can like this and share it, and you can subscribe. And as always, we ask you to work with me here, folks. Thank you, Kate. Whoa!
Thank you.
Thanks, Meetles.